Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the second part of the Special Hobby 132 scale Hawker Tempest build. Last time I built the cockpit and I was hoping to be able to move straight on, fit the cockpit into the fuselage and get the airframe put together. But there are all sorts of fit issues and problems with this kit. They're quite well documented actually, and as a result of that I've spent a lot of time this week just getting the undercarriage bays put together and adjusting the fit of the wings so that we can get them to fit into the fuselage. So there are all sorts of issues, and I'll call them out as we go through the build, but because it's been so involved this week, I'm going to have to break the episode up into two. So in this first episode I'll do the undercarriage bays, get the cockpit fitted properly into the fuselage, get the fuselage joined, and one or two other little bits and pieces. But that's all I've had time for this week, and I've got so much footage from trying to do all that I can't possibly get it just in one episode. It'd be far too long, so I'm breaking it into two. Now, because I've done all this groundwork in this first part, hopefully in the next episode I'll be able to go ahead, get the wings joined up and assembled to the fuselage. I've also started a little bit of work on the nose and the engine, the exposed engine. So hopefully by the end of the next episode we'll have a completed airframe, not at the end of this one as I had hoped. So with so much to do and so many problems to overcome, we'll better get over to the bench and make a start. Right, so let's get into it, and the first thing I want to do this week when building this airframe is to check my particular kit against some of the known fit problems on this model. So the first thing that I want to do is to check the fit of the wing panels onto the fuselage. So what I've done is just cut out the three major panels. This is a single span lower wing with two top separate top wing panels. And I've just taped those together. I'm looking at how that goes together roughly with the fuselage. So I've just temporarily taped the cockpit that I built last week into the fuselage. And if you saw that episode, you'll remember that I just made a comment at the end that a quick test fit of the cockpit into the fuselage halves appeared to be pushing the fuselage open. And you can see the degree of spring in that, how much gap we've got. The rear bulkhead of the cockpit here is right next to the rear of the wing fillets, and I think that that bulkhead's too wide, so it's pushing the wing fillets open a little bit, and that's causing the first problem with the fit, which it's making the fuselage too wide at this point at the back of the wing. So one job will be to reduce the size of this bulkhead in width so that it will tighten the fuselage up. We'll get rid of that, we'll close up that gap on the underside, and hopefully it will improve the fit of the back of the wing here. The second issue that we've got is that if you look at these panels here, which form the roof of the undercarriage bay, you can see there are no internal frames in here at all at the moment. It's just the wings taped together. But if you look at the gap here between those two undercarriage bay roofs, so you'll see that that gap is too narrow to accommodate the cockpit framing that we built last week, and it's probably getting on for 2 millimeters error in that. So we're not going to get that to fit. Doesn't matter how much we push it, it's not going to go in there. So we're going to have to either reduce these or reduce the cockpit framing, or both, probably a combination of both. And what I'm looking for is to be able to just snugly slide that fuselage into position. The gap at the front appears not too bad, it's a fraction too wide. So the front here, this front bulkhead aligns roughly with this forward section, and it's just a fraction too wide, but it's not too much. So just a little bit of trimming will get that to drop in. The major problem is the width of the cockpit vis-a-vis these two panels here for the undercarriage bay roof. So we're going to have to sort that out as well. Now if you don't do that correction and fit the fuselage and cockpit into the wing properly, you'll force it in, and what you will do in doing that is slightly spread apart these two top panels on the upper part of the wing, and that will in turn introduce a tiny trace of anhedral to the inboard part of the wing. So it'll flex down like that. And then what we have on these wing panels is the dihedral starts at this line. The dihedral brake is along the line of the gear strut at this point. So you get a peculiar gull wing effect if you don't fit the fuselage properly. We don't want that, obviously. The correct shape for the Tempest wing from head on is that the inboard wing panels, or the inboard wing sections, were flat and more or less parallel up to the point of the dihedral brake, which is here just inboard of the two cannons. Then obviously the dihedral takes off from that point onwards outboard. What we also want to do is to make sure that we've got the top section of the wing and the bottom of the wing virtually parallel, and it is in the kit. If you put these panels together, they more or less are parallel, top and bottom. From the plans I've seen, there might be a trace of taper down to the dihedral brake here, but it really looks as though it's a parallel section. So we're going to have to be careful how we put this together and fit the fuselage properly and fettle it until it goes in without doing any flexing of that inboard wing. We don't want that. The second issue that I'm aware of is the fit of the wheel bay bulkheads into the wheel bay itself. And just from a quick test fit of this single forward panel, which is actually the rear of the forward spar, goes in that sort of position there. These are slightly too thick, so what that's doing is just pushing the wing panels apart slightly. So they're going to need careful trimming and careful fitting. So there's several sections to these bays so that we get a sealed in, closed off box structure inside the wheel well. So that's the second thing we're going to need to do. The kit also provides separate inserts for the leading edge of the wing on the inboard side here, and that's to accommodate the other versions of the kit where we've got some radiators in the wings here. But for this Mark V, they're just plain section, and in fact this is one of them, which fits in something like that, roughly like that. So that involves quite a bit of work, and we're just going to have to be very careful going about fitting all those together. We've also got some issues with the finish of the wings. So there are some peculiar rough bits. You can hear it there under my fingernail. So these are just going to need smoothing down a little bit, and probably the panel lines touching in, and some of the rivet lines as well. So we'll have to do a little bit of work on the basic plastic to make it presentable for painting. The other issue that I'm aware of in the kit is this nose section. Now Special Hobby mould the nose section separately to accommodate the Mark II, which has got a completely different nose altogether. And in doing that, they've made the fit awkward, and the shape's got some issues as well. Now the fit I'm not so worried about, because this particular boxing's got a separate engine to it, so we'll be removing this top section anyway, and it's this top section where you've got the fit issues, so it's a little bit too tall for the rest of the fuselage, so you get a nasty step at the top. But I can ignore that, I'm not too worried about that. The other issue really is in the plan shape of the nose, at the front here, so it's not tapered enough. It doesn't come in, it doesn't pinch in enough. And because of that, the spinner's a little bit too broad. So it's a fat spinner. And there's also a suggestion that the radiator inlet here, this big opening, is a little bit too wide, so the mouth of the aircraft looks a bit gaping. Now there's not an awful lot that you can do about the shape issues, although Barracuda do a resin nose replacement for this kit. But because I want to fit the engine, I think what I'm going to try to do is just to reprofile this lower section a little bit to draw it in, reduce the spinner in diameter a little bit, but I don't think there's much I can do about the shape and width of the radiator intake. So it's just something I think I'm going to have to live with. But coming back to the start of the build this week, what I want to do is to address that issue of the width of this space here and the fit of the fuselage into this wing panel. Now, because I'm going to be having to take some material off this section here, what I want to do is first of all fit the undercarriage bay bulkheads, because one of those, this inboard one, is going to have to be thinned back to allow the fuselage to drop into position. So that's where we're going to start this week, with the undercarriage bay bulkheads. So this is definitely one of those kits where you've got to do loads of test fitting. It's not going to drop together, as I think I mentioned in the previous episode. So in building this, fortunately we've got a fantastic resource. Over on Large Scale Planes there's a wonderful build of the model, which I'll leave a link for in the video description. And the builder there addresses all the issues that I've talked about in that introductory part of the video. So the fuselage wing fit, the problems with the nose, although the builder there used the Barracuda set to fix that problem. But it's well worth a visit if you're going to build this. And it's given me a real heads up into the problems that you face if you're going to tackle this one. So I want to fit these parts individually, and as I do that I'll check the fit of the upper wing panel just to make sure that they're not spreading the wing apart. So not to make the problem any worse, I'm just making sure that the part's perfectly clean on the mating surface here. So you can see here what we're trying to avoid. If you put the inner bulkhead in here, it leaves us with a gap of getting on for 1 millimetre, so we're going to have to reduce that in height so that that doesn't happen. So with the wings taped together and that inner bulkhead in its correct position, I'm just going to glue it in place onto the lower wing section. This rear bulkhead doesn't fit properly because it's too wide at this point. So when we took that in and butt it up against the first one that we fitted, you can see that it's too wide for this line here on the wing panel. So that just needs shortening a little bit. So you can see that just by doing that little bit of trimming we get a nice fit of the part now. so it butts up against its correct location on this lower wing panel. And I will glue that one in at this stage because it's bracing that first inner bulkhead. So I'm going to leave those two sections to really harden up, and what that'll enable me to do is just sand the top surface of this down a little bit to the point where we get a nice snug fit of this top wing panel. So you can see what we've got to do for each of these parts is to test fit, trim it, and test fit again until you get the correct fit, because the correct fit doesn't come straight out of the box, you've got to find it. And if you don't do that, what you're going to end up with is a badly fitting undercarriage bay, spread wing panels, and the whole thing's going to quickly develop into a bit of a nightmare. Okay, so that's good. So those first two parts are going into the bay all right. So this is the bulkhead and this panel here that we're going to have to reduce in order to get the cockpit frame in. So I want to do this other side, these two pieces on the starboard side. Then we can do the reductions that we need to both the cockpit framing and these side bulkheads until we get a nice snug fit of the fuselage into this piece. So whilst I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm just going to sort out this rear bulkhead, thin it down a little bit so that it fits into the fuselage better and enables the lower part of the fuselage here to close up properly. That should give us the correct width here into the wing that we've just assembled. Okay, so that's not far off. We'll just do a little bit more. Alright, so that'll do for now. It's getting pretty close at that wing fillet. But I need to see it properly once the whole of the fuselage settled down, and I can't do that until I've thinned out these gear bay bulkheads. So that's the next job. This is the section of the framework in the cockpit that I'm trying to thin down. There isn't much to go at because it's only probably 1 millimetre to start with, so I'm not going to take off much more than 1/4 millimetre either side. The rest of the reduction is going to be on the bulkheads. It's nearly there. You can see it just sliding in fairly easily. There's just a bit of resistance, a bit of friction. So I'll go back to thinning these walls. That's it. I think that's about right. So I'll pop the cockpit back into the fuselage and let's see if we can get the whole fuselage to fit. Okay, so that's in, and actually when you've got the work done properly, it's quite a good fit. The wing to fuselage join along here is pretty good. A swipe of Mr. Surfacer on that. It's a bit open on this side, but I may have overdone it on the wing fillet, I don't know. But that probably is going to go together all right now. I hope so anyway. So that's quite a big step. And although it's a lot of work, you've actually no choice but to do it, because otherwise you're not going to get the correct incidence of the wing. Probably quite a bit of filling to do around the wing to fuselage join, and I'm not going to have any of that now that the parts are properly prepared and joined. So I can go on now and concentrate on finishing the wheel wells. With the top wing panels off, you can see just how much those bulkheads have been thinned down by. They're probably only about 1/4 millimetre thick now. The problem with most of these parts, these bulkheads, in terms of the fit, is they don't have the correct chamfer on the end. And that's what they need to be able to fit into the bays correctly. So each one has got to be individually checked and fitted. We need to just check the position of this part by fitting the top wing, and that's because it sits in this channel here. So if you've got it slightly one way or another, it's not going to fit in that channel when the glue's set. So just pop the wing panels together, manoeuvre the bulkhead, and it just clips down into that channel like that. I'll just peg that down until the glue's set. So as you can see, you've got to do this step by step, because if you try to assemble the kit as Special Hobby direct you in the instructions, and assembled all these bulkheads, it's very unlikely that you're going to get the the upper and lower wings to come together properly, because as you've seen, they're just not fitted properly until you do some work with them. So again, that's a case of having to leave that to dry before we come back and do the next panels. Okay, let's move on another step with these undercarriage bays. On the port side, I've already fitted the last 3 panels, the last 3 bulkheads on the inside, so that's now completely enclosed on this port side. So we've just got another 3 panels to fit. We have one that goes along the front of the bay, which is actually the rear of the main spar. We've got this angled piece which sits at the back there, and we've also got an inner panel which sits at the end, quite a small one, but it's a really important fit to get that right, because it's the mounting point for the undercarriage leg. We'll get the 3 parts out that we need, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll also cut the undercarriage strut, because we need to use that to test that we've got the bulkheads in the correct position. So we've got the main leg and the retraction jack. So we've got to get these to fit together, obviously, but because they're mounted on this front bulkhead, we've got to get this bulkhead in the correct place, and we've also got to get the undercarriage mounting point, which is this, also in the correct place. So the relationship of this jack, the leg And this mounting point on this inner part here is really important because that will set the geometry of the undercarriage, and what we're looking for is for the leg to be perpendicular to this flat section of the wing here, like that. And obviously when we've got the jack will push the leg one way or another. So if you've not got this front bulkhead in the right place, the retraction jack won't be in the right place, and consequently your leg will either lean in or splay out like that. So it's really important to get this step right. The position of this bulkhead, you can see that it will move from left to right. So you've got to get it in the right position because we've got some supporting brackets which go from the bulkhead onto the ribs here on the top wing. So you've got to align those properly so that those brackets will fit. So that's in the correct position. That's where we want that bulkhead. So with that I can just tape it into position. So that's lined up properly, it's where we want it. So I'll glue it onto the lower wing panel. That's the angled piece in. Now we've got this inner bulkhead to fit. So the important thing with this is to get it really tight up, flush against the opening here at this point in the lower wing panel. And if you do that, when you set this piece, which goes inside and holds the undercarriage leg, it will be at the correct distance outboard, and that should give us space to fit the retraction jack in. So we just need to do that and test fit as we go along. These parts are a truly terrible fit. I don't think I've come across anything like this for quite a long time, and it's a real test of your fitting skills really. So that's the important thing, to get that tight up there. The temptation with this bulkhead is to push it onto the other two pieces at the front and back here. But if you do that, there's a danger that it will come too far inboard because of the poor fit. So the primary thing to look for is to get it flush up. Okay, so that's in, and that's in its correct position at this point. So you can see that the tab is just slightly proud of the opening in the undercarriage bay, which is fine because we've got a door that sits in there. So with that setting up, I'll just squeeze in the mounting block for the undercarriage. This is quite a fiddly fit, so it might take a few attempts to get it in. Make sure that's a really strong bond because it's going to take the weight of the aircraft. So with that mounting block in place, I'll just check that everything's going to go together. So we'll just temporarily drop the leg into place and the strut, connect it up as it's meant to be, and just check the incidence of the undercarriage. So that's okay, that's going to be about right. If you didn't do that step properly and get this block in the correct position, then you'd have terrible trouble later on trying to get the undercarriage legs in. So that's alright as it goes. We've got all the bulkheads in. I'll just leave that to dry again. It needs to be really firm, and once it has, we'll come back and have a look at what we need to do next with the undercarriage. So I'm going to have to think ahead a little bit to the fitting of the engine and the nose piece. I'm not going to be doing it in this episode, but I just want to prepare the fuselage, this front section here, so that it will accept this bulkhead. So I've just marked off on the plastic bulkhead the line of the resin insert, and I'll cut that out. I'm going to leave a section here at the bottom of the plastic because that gives the correct width of the fuselage at this point, and it just adds a little bit of strength. If I remove the whole thing, I'm just going to have a very flexible fuselage, and I don't want that. We might as well use this to keep some rigidity in the assembly. Fitting a part like this is really just trial and error. Just take a little bit off, see where it's binding, and just keep on trimming away until you get a nice snug fit. So we're closing in on it now. You can see that it's nearly in, and at this stage you've got to take it really easy because there's a chance that you might just go a bit too far at this point. Okay, that's just about right. I'm happy with that, and I'm glad I did that at this stage. So if you've got this particular version of the high-tech Tempest with the engine, I think it is important to keep this bottom section because, as I said, it does add quite a bit of strength to that assembly. So this bulkhead does really need to be positioned before I glue the fuselage to the wings, because you need to be able to position it with your fingers inside the fuselage. So we'll do that once we get the cockpit in and the fuselage assembled. So it's gradually coming together, this one. We're gradually beating the errors out of it. With the opening cut out here, it's time to just close this fuselage up. I want to give it plenty of time to dry before I attempt to attach the wings. So first job is to get the cockpit in. I've finished the last bits of weathering on it. I've added some mud to the floorboards and some scratches, little scuffs using the aluminium pencil. You'll have seen me use that before, just on the seat and just here and there around the cockpit. The canopy rails have been put in as well, painted black and also weathered, so we can get this put together. So to make sure that this is nice and strong, I'm going to be using some CA on this. So this is super thin, just wick into that join there, and it dries in about 4 or 5 seconds, but I'll put a little bit too much on there probably. It's going to take a while longer to dry. Okay, that's nice and solid. Just check the fit of the other side of the fuselage. It should be okay. I've not done anything to it really since I last tried, but you can't test fit too many times. I like to use this contactor professional for fuselage joints, or any major joint really, because it just ensures that you can get plenty of cement onto the mating surfaces. Here I'm just trying to keep the top of the fuselage join level. It's tending to try to flex one down and one up, so we're going to end up with a step along the top of the fuselage if we don't sort that out. But these clamps, these are burner clamps, and they've got really soft rubbery feet on them, and that molds itself to the shape of the fuselage at this point, and pulls both parts of the assembly together, so we maintain that nice curve over the top. There she is, all trussed up, and I'll leave that for 24 hours just to make sure that the cement's all set. And in the meantime, we'll go back to the wings and see what we need to do next with those. So I'm thinking now about what we need to do to get the upper and lower wing panels joined up. I'm going to do some detailing in the undercarriage bays with some wire, but before we can join these together, we've got to fit the lamp which goes underneath here. It's fitted from inside. It's a dual colour lamp, a red and green I think it is, and that needs to be fitted from the inside with a clear cover on it. So before I forget, I'll do that now. Even these little panels or boxes that fit onto the roof of the undercarriage bay, they don't fit, so you've got to trim them until you can get them to go in. So putting these detail parts in makes me think that really it would have been slightly easier to fit the bulkheads onto the upper wing panel, for two reasons. The first is that you'll be able to position these detail parts, these braces and so on, because they attach to the bulkhead and the upper wing panel. And also it would have made painting easier because we would have basically an open undercarriage bay without all the overhangs of the lower panel. So I think if I did this again, that's what I would do. Just ignore the special hobby instructions and fit all the bulkheads and assemble each undercarriage bay onto the top panel. And you can see here the issue that you're having to position these braces and then continually check that they're in the right position by joining the top wing panel. Okay, I'll fit this lamp now. The clear red and clear green has dried. So the fit of this, like other parts on the kit, is poor. So to improve it, I'm just thinning down these sections on the inside of the wing. Just take some material out of them, and what that does is it enables the part, the lens, to fit more flush with the underside. So I'm just removing material from this point here, and that just thins out the area where we're going to be gluing the lens. And when the lens goes in, with that thinning, we've got the underside more or less flush with the underside of the wing, which is what we're after. So I'll glue that in very carefully, but we do need to get a pretty strong bond with this because we don't want it popping out. The next thing to do with this lamp is to paint the inside in the interior green colour, because you can see the internal structure through the lens. So that's the next step, and then finally I'll put some chrome foil to back the red and green paint, and that'll just add a little bit of sparkle behind the lenses. So I'll find a couple of circle masks. So these happen to be 3.8mm. That's a perfect size to fit in the outer recess. So with those in, I'll get some interior green in the airbrush and we'll just paint the background to those lamps. So what we end up with is the lens, and you can see that the chrome has brightened up the green and red, and it's also left, because of the size of the circular mask that we use there, it's left a silver circle around the edge as though it's the lamp frame or the surround to the lamp. So that's all good, that looks nice. I'll put the masks on that are provided in the kit so that I don't scratch or scuff the lens surface. Okay, so I think that's a good place to take a break for this first part of the airframe build. And I've had lots of footage. This has taken hours and hours to do the fitting of all the undercarriage bay parts, the pour fit of the cockpit and the width of the cockpit. All those issues, all these fit issues have taken a really long time this week to sort out, and I've got hours and hours of footage, and the first video is already a little bit too long, so I'm going to pause it there, and next time I'll finish the airframe off. We'll clean the fuselage up, I'll fit the engine bay bulkhead and sort out the nose parts. I'll detail the undercarriage bay, put some cables and wires and pipes in there, join the top wing, and at that stage we'll get everything together, and hopefully at the end of the next video we'll have a complete airframe. But I wanted to really go through that process of fitting for those of you that are contemplating building this model, and I know that several of you are. So hopefully what's gone on over the last 50 minutes or so will help you overcome some of the issues in the kit. As I said during the video, it's by no means an easy kit to build. You need to be prepared to do all that fitting work in order to get a reasonable fit. And as I said, I hope the video is helpful for those of you that are building it. So as I said, I'll leave it for there. I'll get straight on with the work that I've just described, and it'll only be 2 or 3 days before I get the next video out and we'll finish this airframe off. So until then, everybody, look after yourselves, stay safe, and I'll see you in a few days' time. Bye for now.